I went to see an old friend in Buckinghamshire just before I moved away. It turned out to be our last meeting. He was in the hospital. For years, we'd spent countless hours arguing. He held these really deeply racist beliefs. He wasn't a simple-minded guy, but he felt left behind by the world and desperately needed someone to blame for it. He always landed on the immigrant, but sitting there in that quiet room, he was different. He'd had an epiphany. He started talking about the people caring for him, his doctor, the nurses, the Filipino carer who, he said, showed him more tenderness than he deserved. Every single person tasked with easing his final days was, by his own definition, a foreigner. He'd spent his whole life consumed by this resentment, and in the end, it just evaporated. And as he was telling me this, regretting all that wasted anger, the only sound was the rhythmic hiss of the oxygen machine. He was dying of end-stage lung cancer. He'd been a heavy smoker his whole life. That contradiction just hung in the air. This profound late-life realization about one lie he'd built his identity on, all while another, more cynical lie, one he literally bought and paid for, was the very thing extinguishing his life. That story, I think, really sets the stage, where that personal cost smashes right up against a kind of systemic, cynical lie.
It really does. It captures that contradiction perfectly.
And that's exactly why we need to dig into these contradictions today. We're diving into this clash between truth and power, specifically how scientific facts we need for public health, for the environment, get actively pushed down.
Suppressed, yeah. By political interests, by corporate interests.
Right. We want to understand the mechanics, how these blind spots get created in society, these deadly blind spots, and importantly, the ethical tightrope that the people holding the truth have to walk.
Absolutely. And our mission today really is to break down the tactics. How is doubt manufactured? How is policy stalled? We're going to look back, draw some clear lines between the tobacco industry's playbook and what we see now with the fossil fuel industry.
Because it's not new, is it, this strategy?
Oh, not at all. The blueprint is disturbingly similar. Then we'll pivot to look at how deep the political interference goes in government science itself. We've got documented evidence, federal, state levels. And finally, we explore this really critical question, especially now, with such huge risks on the horizon. When does speaking truth to power mean becoming a whistleblower? Particularly for climate scientists, facing this immense moral pressure when the normal channels are blocked.
When telling the truth becomes an act of courage, essentially.
Precisely. When the system fails to act on the evidence.
Okay, let's get into it then. This idea that scientific denial isn't new, that it's this proven playbook from big tobacco decades ago.
Right.
When those first links, the really undeniable ones between smoking and cancer, started coming out, they didn't just, argue the facts, they did something more systemic.
Oh, much more. They built an infrastructure of doubt. It's
Yeah.
fascinating, actually, how calculated it was. This tobacco industry playbook, it really ramps up in the 1950s, right when the science linking smoking to serious illness became crystal clear.
So the clearer the science got.
The more deliberate the strategy to obscure it became. The goal was simple: protect massive profits, no matter the public health cost. And they were explicit about it. There's this internal memo from R.J. Reynolds in 1969. It's infamous now.
What did it say?
It laid it right out there. Doubt is our product since it is the best means of competing with the body of fact that exists in the mind of the general public.
Wow. Doubt is our product. That's not PR, that's anti-PR. It's actively selling confusion instead of information.
Exactly. Forget truth. Sell uncertainty. They knew if they could keep this perception of a scientific controversy alive, even a manufactured one, then policymakers would hesitate.
Gives them an outright, plausible deniability for inaction.
Precisely. And the public stays confused, maybe keeps smoking. It formalized the strategy, used uncertainty to block regulation.
So, okay, doubt was the philosophy. What were the actual tools, the tactics in this playbook? You said it was an infrastructure, so it must have had these repeatable parts.
It did. And these tactics are now textbook examples in studies of corporate strategy and ethics, unfortunately. There are several key components. First, manufacturing uncertainty.
How did they manufacture it?
Primarily by funding what critics eventually called junk science. They'd commission studies, often designed with, let's say, convenient flaws in methodology or a very narrow scope.
So they weren't looking for real answers.
No, the goal wasn't to advance knowledge. It was purely to generate ambiguous or conflicting results, to create the appearance of a legitimate scientific debate where, increasingly, there wasn't one among independent researchers.
Ah, okay. So a major health body releases a clear finding, and big tobacco could then point to, say, 10 smaller, maybe industry-funded studies with murky results and claim, look, the science isn't settled, scientists disagree.
Exactly that. It creates that false balance that he said, she said, the media sometimes falls for. It muddies the water, undermines the consensus. Okay, second tactic, attacking the messenger.
Oof, that sounds aggressive.
It was, and it was personal. They didn't just question the data. They actively went after the reputations of credible, independent scientists.
What kind of attacks?
Threats to their funding, trying to block promotions or tenure, launching public smear campaigns to damage their professional standing.
That's incredibly cynical. Don't engage with the facts, just destroy the person presenting them. Creates fear, I imagine.
Absolutely. It creates a chilling effect. If you're a young scientist deciding on a research area, are you going to pick something like, say, the health effects of smoking, or later, climate change, if you know there's a well-funded machine ready to attack you personally and professionally?
Yeah, you'd think twice. So manufacture doubt, attack the scientists. What else?
The third pillar was astroturfing and lobbying. This is quite clever in a devious way. They created front groups.
Front groups?
Yeah, organizations with deliberately neutral-sounding, often pro-science names. A classic example was TASCES, the Advancement of Sound Science Coalition.
TASCES sounds perfectly reasonable, like a group promoting good research.
That was the whole point. But TASC was funded and directed by tobacco companies and other industries. It acted as a sophisticated PR and lobbying machine, pretending to be a grassroots movement, hence astroturfing, like fake grassroots.
Got it, fake grassroots.
These groups then lobbied politicians hard, trying to influence appointments, block regulations, all while claiming to represent concerned citizens or sound science. They even had internal playbooks for their lobbyists, like one called Bad Science, a resource book.
A book called Bad Science.
Yeah, it gave lobbyists and PR folks prepackaged arguments to attack independent science and regulatory agencies. It's a complete system. Sow doubt with junk science, intimidate the real scientists, and then use fake citizen groups to pressure lawmakers.
Okay, that's a remarkably thorough system for denial. Which brings us right to the core issue today. How directly did the fossil fuel industry pick up this exact playbook? Are we just seeing the same tactics applied to climate change?
We're seeing an almost direct copy-paste, often using the very same PR firms, the same consultants, the same individuals who cut their teeth during the tobacco wars. The adoption wasn't accidental, it was intentional. And the clearest case study here, the one with the most internal documentation, is ExxonMobil.
ExxonMobil?
Yeah.
Right. There was a big study on their documents, wasn't there? By Harvard researchers.
Yes, exactly. They analyzed 187 Exxon documents spanning decades, internal memos, scientific papers published by Exxon's own scientists, and their public communications, like ads.
And what was the headline finding? What did comparing their internal knowledge to their public statements show?
It showed what the researchers called ExxonMobil's dual narrative, a stark, statistically significant difference between what Exxon knew internally and what it told the world.
Okay, break that down. What did they know internally?
Internally, in their private communications and in the peer-reviewed research their own scientists were publishing, about 80% of the documents acknowledge that climate change is real and that it's caused by human activity. Their own experts were confirming the global scientific consensus.
80% internal agreement. Okay, so what were they saying publicly?
The complete opposite. In their public messaging, especially in those paid advertorials, ads designed to look like opinion pieces in places like the New York Times, roughly 80% of those statements expressed doubt. Doubt that climate change was real, or doubt that humans were the cause.
That's not just a difference of opinion. That's documented. Intentional deception.
Yeah.
Maintaining two completely separate narratives.
It's proof of a deliberate strategy. Keep the internal experts informed, maybe to manage future risk, but feed the public and policymakers uncertainty to delay action. And it goes beyond statistics. There are concrete examples of this duplicity.
Like what?
Well, back in 1985, Exxon's own scientists were co-authors on a Department of Energy report. It accurately projected significant global warming, predicting something like 2 to 5 degrees Celsius warming by 2100. This was top-tier science done internally.
They knew back in 85.
They knew the potential severity. Yet, fast forward a few years, and Exxon is running public ads explicitly questioning whether human activity had even begun to change the climate, claiming the science was just too uncertain.
Incredible. And did they use that tactic of, like, cherry-picking data, too.
Oh, absolutely.
Banana.
Classic move. There was the infamous Sargasso Sea temperature chart they used in public materials.
The Sargasso Sea, why that?
Because, while technically accurate for that one specific tiny part of the ocean, it showed less warming than the global average. They used this isolated data point to imply that current global temperatures weren't unusual or alarming.
Deceptive.
Highly deceptive. They cherry-picked the location and they cut the timeline off just before the most dramatic recent warming really kicked in globally. It created a completely false impression of climate stability.
So, using a tiny, unrepresentative piece of truth to tell a much bigger lie. Okay, but eventually a lot of these internal documents came out right. Did the strategy change then?
It had to pivot. Once the decades of internal knowledge versus public denial were exposed, outright denial became less credible. So the strategy shifted to what we now call greenwashing.
Ah, greenwashing. We hear that term a lot. What does it entail in this context?
It means companies start making very public, often ambitious-sounding pledges about sustainability, green initiatives, net zero goals.
I'm good on the surface.
Right. But behind the scenes, often through industry associations and lobbying, they continue to fight tooth and nail against meaningful climate policies, carbon pricing, regulations that would actually force systemic change.
So public virtue signaling while privately obstructing action.
Exactly. And another key part of this pivot was successfully promoting the idea of the individual carbon footprint.
Which feels like personal responsibility, but
But it very effectively shifts the focus and the blame away from the massive systemic emissions of large corporations and onto individual consumer choices. It's a brilliant distraction technique, really.
makes sense. Focus on recycling bins, not refineries. Okay, this whole pattern, the denial, the deception, the lobbying, spanning decades across industries. It sounds like more than just unethical business. Are there legal parallels being drawn?
There are, and they're quite serious. Legal experts who were deeply involved in the big lawsuits against the tobacco industry see direct parallels. Sharon Eubanks, for example.
Who is she?
She was the lead attorney for the U.S. Department of Justice in the federal ICO case against Big Tobacco. That's the Racketeer Influenced and Corrupt Organizations Act.
RECO, like organized crime.
Yes, the law was designed to prosecute criminal enterprises. And Eubanks has testified publicly that, in her legal view, the conduct of the fossil fuel industry, the coordinated deception, the funding of front groups, the suppression of internal science mirrors the actions that led to the successful RECO judgment against tobacco.
So she believes there's a basis for a similar legal approach against big oil.
She stated quite clearly that the similarities form a solid and appropriate basis for the Department of Justice to investigate big oil under IQAR for a potential coordinated conspiracy to deceive the public and regulators.
What's the core argument for it being like racketeering?
It's the idea of a long-term, systematic conspiracy involving multiple actors, the companies, PR firms, think tanks, sometimes scientists all working together to defraud the public for financial gain, despite knowing the risks. Just like the tobacco case, the argument is that the documented history of ExxonMobil and others funding denial, running misleading ads, while internally acknowledging the science, fits that pattern of racketeering activity.
Okay, so we have this corporate playbook for denial. But the story doesn't end there, right? Because it's not just corporations misleading the public. Sometimes it seems like the government itself is involved in hiding or manipulating the science produced by its own experts.
That's the other deeply concerning piece of this. When the institutions tasked with generating objective data for the public good actively interfere with that process.
And how widespread is this? Is it just, isolated cases, a bad appointment here or there, or is it more systemic within government agencies?
The evidence points towards systemic. There was a major survey, quite revealing, looked at 279 federal scientists across 7 key agencies, NASA, NOAA, EPA, places like that.
Okay, what did they find?
It was pretty stark. Out of those 279 scientists, 150 reported experiencing political interference in their work. And that wasn't just once or twice. They documented at least 435 specific instances of interference over just a 5-year period.
Over 400 instances in 5 years from just that sample group.
Exactly. That number alone tells you it's not just a few rogue managers. And these weren't rookies either. The vast majority, over 80%, had PhDs. Nearly half had been with their agency for 15 years or more.
So experienced senior scientists are reporting this interference, which suggests it's targeted at work that really matters.
Precisely. The more impactful the science, potentially, the more likely it might face interference if it challenges a political agenda. We have specific examples from different agencies that really illustrate the kinds of federal censorship and muzzling that go on.
Okay, let's hear some. What about NASA? You think space exploration? Surely they're immune.
You'd hope so, but no. At NASA, the interference often manifested as message control, especially around climate change. We learned that political appointees at the White House were demanding to review all climate-related press releases from NASA scientists,
Vetting the science communication.
but effectively censoring it. Dr. Drew Shindell, a respected NASA climate scientist, had his press release about research on Antarctic climate change significantly watered down by press officers, apparently under political pressure. It got diluted so much it basically lost its news value.
So the science gets done, but the public doesn't hear about it in a way that matters. Soft censorship.
Exactly. In another case, a different NASA scientist had a release about climate impacts on agriculture, specifically flooding. It was just rejected outright. No explanation given initially. It only got approved after higher-ups intervened, suggesting internal political battles over releasing uncomfortable findings.
Wow. So political agendas directly blocking the flow of scientific information to the public? What about NOAA? They handle our weather and climate data. Crucial stuff.
NOAA had some particularly blatant examples. There was the Minder tactic.
The Minder tactic. Sounds ominous.
It was. An investigation found at least 4 instances where NOAA scientists were only allowed to do media interviews if a political appointee, a Minder, flew across the country, on the taxpayer's dime, mind you, to sit in on the interview.
Wait, they paid for someone to fly across the country just to watch a scientist talk to a reporter?
Yes, it's extreme micromanagement. The clear goal is intimidation, make the scientists stick only to pre-approved talking points, discourage any independent thought or nuance, control the message by making the messenger nervous.
Unbelievable.
And it gets worse. There was documented data manipulation at the OMB, the Office of Management and Budget. Political appointees there actually altered scientific documents that came from NOAA.
Changed the science.
They changed the documents to, quote, misrepresent the science of climate change. And these weren't just internal memos. These were materials being prepared for U.S. senators who were conducting oversight.
So Congress itself was potentially being fed manipulated scientific information by the executive branch. That undermines the whole check and balance system.
It absolutely does. It's a direct corruption of the process. And the politicization didn't just stop at reports and press releases. There was a huge controversy around the integrity of a specific climate data set.
Right, I think I remember this, the NOAA Carl study flap.
That's the one. This was really serious. In 2015, a study led by Thomas Carl at NOAA was published. It involved adjusting historical sea surface temperature data.
Okay, adjusting data happens in science, right? For calibration and things.
Yeah. It does, but the effect of this adjustment was significant. It statistically eliminated the so-called climate change hiatus, that period from roughly 1998 to 2013, where the rate of global surface warming appeared to slow down.
Which was a major talking point for climate skeptics, that warming had paused.
Exactly. This study effectively erased that pause from the data set. The controversy exploded when a whistleblower, Dr. John Bates, a senior scientist at NOAA, came forward.
What did he allege?
He alleged that the Carl study was rushed to publication, that it didn't go through the proper, rigorous internal data verification and quality control processes before it was published.
Why rush it?
According to Bates, it was rushed specifically to influence policy. The timing was key. It came out right before major international climate negotiations like the Paris Conference. The implication was clear. Scientific process was compromised to support a specific political agenda, to remove an inconvenient data point before a critical summit.
And NOAA resisted congressional inquiries about the data afterwards, didn't they?
They did, which only fueled the controversy and the perception that something was being hidden. It raises profound questions about data integrity when political timelines seem to override scientific protocols.
Okay, so this isn't just about controlling the message. It's potentially about manipulating the core data. That's deeply troubling at the federal level. What about at the state level? Decisions there often have immediate impacts on people's health and safety.
State-level agencies are often even more vulnerable, unfortunately. They usually have smaller budgets, less independence, and are more directly under the thumb of state governors or legislatures.
Making them easier to pressure.
Potentially, yes. And the consequences can be immediate and dangerous. We see reports showing science being suppressed or manipulated in state agencies across the country, and often it's vulnerable communities, low-income areas, communities of color who bear the brunt. There are numerous examples of state-level abuse.
Could you give us some specific examples, health and safety related?
Sure. In Florida, the state surgeon general was found to have actually altered an official state report about COVID-19 vaccines. He inserted misleading claims, questioning their safety, contradicting federal health guidance.
Undermining public health efforts directly.
In New York, during the height of the pandemic, state officials were found to have deliberately suppressed data on COVID-19 deaths in nursing homes. They obscured the true toll for political reasons.
Hiding devastating numbers. What about environmental safety at the state level?
We see problems there too. In California, the state's Geologic Energy Management Division was caught falsifying government records. They basically rubber-stamped oil drilling permits without doing the legally required review to ensure water safety.
Cutting corners on environmental protection.
Exactly. And a really alarming case happened in Texas. The state's environmental agency had to set a standard for a chemical called ethylene oxide.
I know that one is used for sterilization, but it's a known carcinogen, right?
Yes, a potent one. The overwhelming scientific consensus pointed towards needing a strict standard to protect public health. But the Texas agency ignored that body of evidence.
What do they base their decision on instead?
They relied on a single outlier study, one widely criticized by other scientists as flawed, to justify setting a much weaker, less protective standard for ethylene oxide emissions.
Which means people living near those facilities are exposed to higher cancer risks.
That's the direct implication. Prioritizing industry convenience over public health based on demonstrably weak science.
So across the board, federal and state, the quality of the science is under threat, public trust gets eroded. What does this do to the pipeline of future scientists? If you're a bright student thinking about a government science career.
It's incredibly damaging. The National Academies of Science have warned about this. They've pointed out that funding cuts for long-term climate monitoring are creating irretrievable gaps in our data. We're literally losing the ability to track changes accurately over time.
Blinding ourselves for the future.
And beyond the data gaps, scientists themselves talk about a chilling effect. If you know your work might be buried, manipulated, or you might even be attacked for doing honest research, well, you might think twice about a federal career. It discourages the best and brightest from entering public service science precisely when we need them most.
Okay, so we have this situation. Corporations actively creating doubt, governments sometimes suppressing their own scientists' findings. The normal model, you do the research, you publish it, policymakers act on it, that seems broken in these contexts.
Completely broken. The foundational assumption that good data leads to rational action just doesn't hold when powerful forces are deliberately working against the data.
So when the stakes are incredibly high public health crises, the future of the planet with climate change, does this create a different kind of obligation for scientists? Does it shift from just reporting data to something more active, maybe even a moral obligation to ensure the truth gets out?
I think it absolutely does. The traditional role of the scientist operates within an implicit social contract. You provide objective truth, society uses it for the common good. But when that contract is breached, when the system meant to use the truth is actively subverting it for political or financial gain, the scientist's primary loyalty has to shift.
Shift from what to what?
It has to shift from loyalty to institutional rules and protocols, the agency handbook, the corporate policy towards a higher ethical duty, protecting the public from harm, especially when the danger is clear, present, and being deliberately obscured.
So in those extreme cases, speaking out, maybe even whistleblowing, isn't an act of betrayal against the institution.
It's an act of fidelity to public trust. It's upholding the real mission the institution was supposed to serve in the first place. When the system fails, the individual conscience, backed by evidence, has to step in. It becomes, as you said, an act of necessity.
And it changes the scientist's role, doesn't it? Their objective knowledge becomes a tool for civic action.
Exactly. And interestingly, some leading experts in corporate governance and law are starting to reframe how we should think about whistleblowers entirely.
How so? Not just as disgruntled employees.
No, quite the opposite. They argue whistleblowers should be seen as invaluable assets. They are the organization's eyes and ears, its best risk management tool.
Risk management. That's an interesting angle. How does blowing the whistle manage risk?
Think about it. They call it the forward indicator of risk concept. The whistleblower is often the first person with the courage, the intestinal fortitude, as one expert put it, to point out a serious problem, an institutional blind spot that leadership is ignoring or complicit in.
Like the engineers warning about the O-rings on the Challenger.
Precisely. If those warnings are suppressed, you get a catastrophe, a huge financial loss, a reputational disaster, a public health crisis. Research actually shows that companies with effective, safe internal reporting channels where employees feel they can speak up without retaliation, those companies tend to be more profitable and suffer fewer major crises.
Because they can catch problems early and fix them. Course correct.
Exactly. So exposing those blind spots, while maybe painful in the short term, is actually crucial for long-term health and stability. It's fundamentally good governance.
Okay, that's a powerful reframing. But let's be realistic. The personal risk for the whistleblower, especially a scientist taking on powerful interests, is massive.
It's enormous. Retaliation is common and often severe.
So if a scientist reaches that point, that last resort where they feel they must speak out, what are they facing? What protection exists? What are the dangers? And what kind of preparation is absolutely critical before they take that step?
It is a last resort, and navigating the legal landscape is treacherous because often the retaliation comes through legal means designed to crush them financially and professionally. There are several common legal attacks used against scientists.
Okay, what's the first one they should expect?
Weaponized transparency laws. Using open records laws like FOIA, the Freedom of Information Act, or state equivalents, not for their intended purpose, but to harass.
How does that work?
Industry-funded groups, or sometimes political opponents, will file massive, burdensome requests demanding years' worth of emails, personal notes, draft documents, everything.
The goal isn't really information, it's overwhelming the scientist.
Right. Drown them in paperwork, force them onto the defensive, tie up their time and resources, and hope to find one ambiguous sentence, one poorly worded email out of thousands that can be taken out of context and used in a smear campaign.
So preparation is key, even before you blow the whistle.
Absolutely. Meticulous record keeping is vital. And crucially, maintaining a clear separation between personal and professional communications and accounts. You don't want your personal life dragged into a FOIA phishing expedition.
Okay, what else? Beyond FOIA harassment.
They might face congressional inquiries. A hostile committee chair can use their oversight power to haul a scientist in for questioning. Unlike a court, the procedural protections are fewer, and it can become a very public, politicized spectacle designed to discredit the researcher.
Trial by committee?
Essentially. And then there are civil subpoenas. If litigation looks likely, and it often does, scientists can be subpoenaed. This triggers a legal duty to preserve everything potentially relevant.
Everything, like personal texts.
Potentially. Emails, data files, social media messages, even files on personal computers if they relate to the work. Failure to preserve evidence can lead to serious legal sanctions. It's a huge burden.
Okay, it sounds incredibly daunting. What about the other side? What actual whistleblowing protection exists under the law, specifically for, say, a federal scientist?
The protections are specific and, frankly, quite narrow. Generally, they cover disclosures related to certain categories, a clear violation of a law, rule, or regulation, gross mismanagement, a gross waste of funds, an abuse of authority, or, importantly, a substantial and specific danger to public health or safety.
What's not covered?
This is critical. Simply disagreeing with a policy decision or having a different scientific interpretation generally does not qualify for whistleblower protection. The disclosure has to fall into one of those specific wrongdoing categories.
So how you frame the disclosure is legally crucial.
Absolutely. Which leads to the crucial preparation needed. This isn't something to do lightly or alone.
What's step one?
Non-negotiable. Consult an attorney who specializes in whistleblower law and do it early before making any disclosure. They can advise if your situation qualifies for protection and the safest way to proceed.
I know.
Understand the difference between speaking as a private citizen versus speaking in your official capacity as a federal researcher. Your rights and protections can change depending on which hat you're wearing. And the absolute golden rule for self-protection.
Yes.
Never, ever use government resources, government computers, email accounts, phones, printers to document your concerns or communicate about your plans to blow the whistle.
Why is that so critical?
Because anything on government systems technically belongs to the government. They can potentially access it, and it might not be protected. You need to keep your evidence, your notes, your communications with your lawyer completely separate on personal devices and accounts. It's about maintaining control and confidentiality. #outro. So we really traced this arc, haven't we? From the, frankly, cynical strategies born in the tobacco industry decades ago, manufacturing doubt, attacking science, to how those same tactics were picked up and refined by the fossil fuel industry.
Creating that dual narrative, yeah, saying one thing internally, another publicly.
Exactly. And then we saw how this culture of suppressing inconvenient truths bleeds into government itself. The political interference, the muzzling of scientists at places like NASA and NOAA, the manipulation of data.
Even down to the state level, impacting health and safety directly.
Right. And the opening story you shared really brought home the human cost of these systemic lies, didn't it? Lives lost, potential wasted, all while these cynical games are played.
It really did. So when you put it all together, when those normal channels, the ones built on trust and evidence, are deliberately blocked or corrupted,
then the act of a scientist, particularly a climate scientist, facing existential stakes, stepping forward to tell the truth, it changes. It's no longer just reporting data.
it becomes what? An act of defiance.
Or perhaps an act of necessity. It transforms their objective knowledge into a necessary tool for civic engagement, for challenging the lies that are actively undermining our collective future.
Yeah, a tool to force a confrontation with reality.
And ultimately, I think the call here is for a shift in how we as a society view these truth tellers. We need to move past seeing whistleblowers as troublemakers or liabilities.
And see them as
Essential safeguards, as heroes maybe, guardians of our long-term interests. Because by exposing those dangerous institutional blind spots, they're actually guiding us, forcing us towards the changes we desperately need to make. They restore integrity.
It really puts the onus back on us, doesn't it? The question isn't just about whether the scientists will find the courage to speak out against immense pressure.
No, perhaps the bigger question is whether the rest of society is brave enough and prepared enough to actually listen, protect them, and act when they do.